Hi there, Jake and Lily. It's Grandad here. I'm going to read you a story. The Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch by Ronda and David Armitage. Once there was a lighthouse keeper called Mr. Grinling. At night he lived in a small white cottage perched high on the cliffs. In the daytime he rowed out to his lighthouse on the rocks to clean and polish the light. Mr. Greeling was a most industrious lighthouse keeper. Come rain or shine, he tended that light. Sometimes at night Mr. Greenling lay sleeping in his warm bed, and the ships would toot to tell him that his light was shining brightly and clearly out to sea. Each morning, while Mr. Greeling polished the light, Mrs. Greeling worked in the kitchen of the little white cottage on the cliffs, concocting delicious lunch for him. Once she'd prepared the lunch, she packed it into a special basket, clipped it onto the wire that ran from the little white cottage to the lighthouse on the rocks. That looks delicious. But on Monday, something terrible happened. Mrs. Greeling had prepared a particularly appetising lunch she had made: mixed seafood salad, lighthouse sandwich, cold chicken, sausages and crisps, peach surprise, iced sea biscuits, drinks and a sauced fruit. She put the lunch in the basket as usual and sent it down the wire. But the lunch did not arrive. It was spotted by 3 scavenging seagulls, who set upon it and devoured it with great gusto. "Clear off, you vermin," shouted Mr. Greeling, but the seagulls took no notice. "This is excellent peach surprise, boys. She's a great cook, Fred. Scrumptious lunch, Tom." That evening Mr. and Mrs. Greeling decided on a plan to baffle the seagulls. "Tomorrow I shall tie the napkin to the basket," said Mrs. Greeling. "Of course, my dear," agreed Mr. Greeling. "A sound plan. They have to try harder than this to stop us, but..." On Tuesday evening Mr. and Mrs. Greeling racked their brains for another plan. "They are a brazen lot, those seagulls," said Mrs. Greeling. "Brazen indeed," said Mr. Greeling. "What shall we do?" "Our cat does not appear to like seagulls," said Mrs. Greeling. "So, my dear," said Mr. Greeling, "Hamish is an accomplished seagull chaser." "Of course!" exclaimed Mrs. Greeling. Tomorrow Hamish can guard the lunch. A most ingenious plan, agreed Mr. Greeling. Hamish did not think this plan was ingenious at all. He spat and hissed at Mrs. Greeling, secured him to the basket. There, Hamish, said Mrs. Greeling consolingly. I'll have a tasty piece of herring waiting for you when you arrive home. Oh dear, that poor cat. I don't think it wants to go in there. Sadly, flying did not agree with Hamish. His fur stood on end when the basket swayed, his whiskers drooped when he peered down at the wet blue sea, and he felt much too sick even to notice the seagulls, let alone scare them away from the lunch. Pretty kitty, like a piece of lobster? This food gets better every day, Fred. Aren't you going to chase us, Kitty? Lackaday, lackaday, said Mr. Greeling sadly. Meow, meow, agreed Hamish pitifully. On Wednesday evening, Mr. and Mrs. Greeling racked their brains again for a new plan. What shall we do? Said Mr. Greeling. Mrs. Greeling looked thoughtful. I have it, she exclaimed. Just the mixture for hungry seagulls. Indeed, my dear, said Mr. Greeling. What have you in mind? Wait and see, said Mrs. Greeling. Just wait and see. Mustard sandwiches, chuckled Mr. Greeling. A truly superb plan, my dear. Truly superb. On Thursday morning, Mrs. Greeling carefully packed the mustard sandwiches and sent them off down the wire to the expectant seagulls. Ugh! Yuck! Ugh! Ugh. While he waited for his lunch down in the lighthouse on the rocks, Mr. Greeling sang snatches of old sea shanties as he surveyed the coastline through the telescope. And this is what he saw. No mustard in this lot, Tom. We'll fly back here for lunch tomorrow, boys. This is delicious chocolate eclair. Ah, well, life is such, mused Mr. Greeling, and he sat down to enjoy a leisurely lunch in the warm sunshine. Bye.